see all of you back this evening. I'm glad that you're here. I had one way that I was going to start this sermon, and Evan, I hope I don't mess you up, because I want to touch in my introduction, instead of going through what I had down, I want to share with you something else. It just came to me as we were sitting here singing. It is a song that we've sung here before. It's been a while, I think, since I've heard it. The song is number 843. It's called "God Give Us Christian Homes." Maybe you remember these words, but let me just share them with you. They're 4 verses. God give us Christian homes, homes where the Bible is loved and taught, homes where the Master's will is sought, homes crowned with beauty, thy love hath wrought. God give us Christian homes. God give us Christian homes. Second stanza, God give us Christian homes, homes where the Father is true and strong, homes that are free from the blight of wrong, homes that are joyous with love and song. God, give us Christian homes. God, give us Christian homes, homes where the mother in queenly quest strives to show others thy way is best. Homes where the Lord is an honored guest. God, give us Christian homes. Fourth stanza, God, give us Christian homes, homes where the children are led to know Christ in His beauty, who loves them so. Homes where the altar fires burn and glow. God, give us Christian homes. My topic tonight is about Christian homes. More so about what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. It's wisdom. Wisdom that God gives first to children and then to parents. And it's wisdom that we need to be sure that we're passing along or striving to live by in our own lives. And it's where I'd like to spend my time tonight. Just 4 verses, verses 1 through 4. But yet in these verses, he talks about what is good for children and how we as parents are to raise our children. And as you look at these, I want to maybe take you a different direction than perhaps you've heard me preach on this before, or maybe someone else has shared it with you. But if you look at verse 1, he says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth." Children, obey your parents in the Lord. Why? A couple of reasons, 2 things that he tells us. First of all, it is because it is in keeping with what we might call natural law. He says it's the right thing to do. For children to obey parents, it's what we as any society would expect of our children. You look down through history, and I dare say that what you're going to find is that it is a principle that has existed down through the ages. The belief that all children are to respect and obey their parents. It's just what we expect. We even as adults may notice a child and we say, well, that's a disrespectful child. We may pick up on that. We may comment about that. Why? Because we are accustomed to children obeying mom and dad. We may have taught our children to do that. But wherever it's absent, you're going to find a generation that is beginning to decay and to degenerate. Let me share with you a couple of passages that bring this out. One is over in Paul's letter to the church at Rome, Romans chapter 1. There we find the Apostle Paul is describing the demise of society. And in that description, he talks about how the society is rejecting God. As a matter of fact, in the last phase of this downward spiral, if you come down to verse 28 of Romans chapter 1, Paul states that this society has reached a point where, as he puts it, they no longer acknowledge God. And the result is that God, as Paul says, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do the things that are not proper. So here's the thing. The society is degenerating. They no longer acknowledge God. So what does God do? God gives them over to a depraved mind. You want this? You're going to have it. Here's where it leads you. Depraved mind. And then Paul begins to describe this society, what's happening within it. He gives us a list of sins, if you will, of which these people are guilty. And one of them stands out because it is pertinent to our lesson tonight. If you drop down to verse 30, he tells us that they are disobedient to their parents. He said this is a sign of a society that's degenerating, that's moving toward its demise. Children are no longer obedient to their parents. If you go over to the second letter that Paul writes to Timothy, remember Timothy is in Ephesus, and Paul has left him there to set in order some things that remain. And one of the things that he does over in 2 Timothy chapter 3, he says that in the last days, difficult times are going to come. Well, as he's describing this, he begins to tell us about, once again, this societal degeneration. And a part of that degeneration, if you look down in verse 2, there in 2 Timothy 3, he says, people will be disobedient to parents. In both places, Paul says, one of the marks of a society that is no longer being the society it is intended to be, a society that honors God, is that the children within that society are no longer obedient to parents. They no longer respect their parents. You know, no matter how natural it may seem to a child, and I'm sure every one of us in this room at one time when we were a certain age, we were not as obedient to our parents as we should have been. And no matter how natural it may seem to us to rebel, to do our own thing, to disobey or to dishonor our parents, to live in such a way, Paul is saying, is to live against the natural order of every civilization. Every civilization that was a thriving civilization had children in it who were obedient. And so what Paul is saying, it's right. It should be expected for children to obey and honor their parents. That's the right thing to do. But there's something else about this. Not only is it in keeping with natural law, it is also in keeping with divine law. Because if you go on and look at what he says, not only does he tell us to honor our father and mother, that it is the right thing to do, to obey our parents, but he goes on to say, honor your father and mother. You've heard that before because it comes straight out of the Ten Commandments. Whether you go back to Exodus chapter 20 and look in verse 12 or Deuteronomy chapter 5 and look in verse 16, both of those places we find the Ten Commandments, and what God says is honor your father and mother. And the simple truth that is brought out in Scripture, whether you go back to the command to Israel in the days that they were coming out of the land of slavery and moving toward the land of promise, or whether you look at what Paul says here, the simple truth is that children must obey and honor their parents. Why? Because God commands it. God says this is what you are to do. Period. Children, obey your parents. Honor your father and mother. And Paul tells us that there is a promise attached to it, that it may be well with you and that you may live long upon the earth. Have you ever thought about that statement, that it may be well with you and that you may live long upon the earth? What he's saying is it may affect how well a child lives and how long a child may live. I know that each of us probably know a child that died at early age for whatever reasons. Maybe health or something else that happened. But the general rule is that children who honor and obey their parents live longer and better. Have you ever thought about that? Why would that be true? Children who obey their parents typically live longer and live better lives. Let me give you 3 reasons. Number 1, a child who obeys his parents will regularly be warned away from things that are harmful. Have you ever told your child, don't touch that electrical socket? Don't put your hand on the stove, it's hot. Don't run out in the street to pick up the ball. We've all done things like that as parents, have we not? Maybe we have been the recipients. Don't ride your bicycle out on this road. It's too busy. The traffic is too dangerous. What are you trying to do? Are you just trying to exert parental authority and show who's the boss? Or are you saying, don't do these things because they are harmful to you and it could hurt you, could even cost you your life? Don't get too close to the edge of that cliff. Don't walk out on that, whatever it may be. Get down from there. Every parent has said something of that nature somewhere down the road to one of their children. When I was 3 years old, my dad brought home a German Shepherd. Somebody had given it to him. He told me, don't get in its face. What did I do? I got in its face. I have the scar to show it, and the stitches proved it when I had that happen. I still remember that. Because I didn't listen. I didn't pay attention. I didn't do what I was told, or I did what I was told not to do. Let me put it that way. If I had listened, I probably would have a few less scars, or one less scar anyway, on my face than I do. But I didn't. And so I paid for that. I suffered the harm as a result. We all, as parents, warn our children. And a child is going to experience fewer accidents and less trauma physically if they tend to listen to their parents. But sometimes we don't listen, do we? We're going to do what we want to do, and then something happens to us. We wound up with a broke arm, skint knee, or whatever it may be because we did not listen to what mom or dad said. So one of the reasons that we need to, not only is it divine law, but when he says that it may be well with you and that you may live long upon the earth, it's because we typically will suffer less harm. Why is that true? And if there are children listening here, the reason it's true is because your mom and dad probably did it and they know what the outcome's going to be and they're trying to prevent you from suffering the same thing they suffered at one point in their lives. Been down that road, done it, got the scars to prove it. You don't want it. I know what's going to happen. Okay? Another reason is that we will be spared the bad habits and the bad friends which tend to ruin or shorten our lives. Think about that for just a moment. Parents, you remember some of the friends that you had, and you can look back in your life and you probably can say, I remember that person and they were not a good influence on me. And whenever I see someone that seems to be like that, I warn my child away from them because I know the direction that is going to take them because of the direction it took me. Have we done that? Probably so. And you see, there are those bad habits that you as parents tell your children, don't do this or do this, to get them out of the bad habit, because you know if you keep doing that bad habit, then it's going to end up hurting you in the long run. And so what do you do as parents? You correct them. And children learn from that correction. We learn that those things are not good for us. I need to do it differently. And how many times have we seen maybe a teenager? And I'm sure those of you who have taught or worked in the school system or worked around young people have seen this. You encounter a teenager whose attitudes and perhaps actions have taken a turn for the worse. Why? Because they've started following the wrong crowd. You know they've been around that person too long. They've been around that group of people, and that group of people have influenced them. Moms and dads, it's not always. You can say, well, I brought them to worship, and I was around them, and I tried to encourage them, and I tried to do that. And it's not always what you didn't do or what you did do. It also has a lot to do with who else they're listening to, who else they're spending time around, and who else they're following in their actions and their attitudes. And so, when he says that it may be well with you and that you may live long upon the earth, part of what we do as parents is to watch over them so that they don't get engaged with the wrong crowd or the wrong people or the wrong things that they will pick up on their phones or watch on their screens and begin to think that way, and that be harmful to them. And then there's a third reason why it is so important that we do this, because he says it will be well with you and that you'll live long upon the earth. It is because our children are far more likely to develop healthy character traits if they listen to us. You see, a disobedient child is more likely to develop harmful patterns in his or her life. It's just part of what goes with the territory. And so what we do when we're trying to instruct them and when we teach them to honor mom and dad, we're working to help them develop those healthy character traits in their lives that will benefit them on down the road. How many of you can remember a time when your dad or your mother taught you certain ways about how you should behave in society, especially around if you work for somebody? If you want to have a good reputation in the community, always tell the truth. If you want to get a good job, if you want to keep that job, if you want to move up in that job, don't sit around waiting on somebody to show you what to do. Go look for something to do. If you have nothing else to do, pick up a broom and start sweeping the floor. I remember being told that. And we even tell our children that today, that employers look for those individuals who have a willingness to work and have a good work ethic. And so we try to instill that within them. And I dare tell you that you could find employers in this building here tonight that could tell you, I've seen those who have never been taught those things. And we couldn't keep them because we couldn't use them. We had to let them go. So all of those things, it will be well with you and you will live long upon the earth. Consider 3 statements that Solomon makes in the book that we call the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 4 verse 10, hear my son and accept my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. Or Proverbs 10 verse 27, the fear of the Lord prolongs life, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. Isn't that exactly what we just found Paul saying? That it may be well with you and that you may live long upon the earth. Well, here's one that if you read it, it truly opens your eyes. Proverbs 30, verse 17. The eye that mocks a father and scorns a mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out and the young eagles will eat it. Well, that is a very vivid description of a child that is disrespectful of mom and dad, even abusive of them. But what does it mean to obey your parents in the Lord? That word translated obey comes from 2 words in the Greek which literally mean to listen under. What's it saying? What is Paul saying? He's saying that obedience requires conscious listening. That we actually are taking the time to listen to what's being said. Time and time again, in the wilderness wandering of the Israelites, if you go back and just start reading through the book of Deuteronomy, you find God commanding the Israelites over and over again to listen to Him. In that same book, if you read it through a second time, you will also find that they suffered a number of times because they did not listen to Him. And for any child to obey his parents, his or her parents in the Lord, means that they listen to their parents with the intent to understand what their parents are saying and to do what their parents have called upon them to do. That's what it means to listen. And he's talking about those things that are consistent with God's Word. But I think every one of us knows something, and it is that attitude has a lot to do with a child's obedience, does it not? The right attitude. And obedience is a matter of attitude. Perhaps you've heard the story of the little boy that the teacher told to go sit in the corner. And he's sitting in the corner in the chair. And he says out loud, I'm sitting on the outside, but I'm standing on the inside. What he's saying is, I'm doing what you've told me to do, but boy, in my heart, in my mind, I'm doing the opposite. We've seen children like that. I'm going to do what you've said do because you can make me do it, but I'm telling you what, I don't like it and I'm not going to do any more than I have to do. The attitude is not there to want to obey. You see, honoring and obeying parents goes beyond just the outward obedience. It goes to the heart. It goes to the attitude. And one of the things that as children we hopefully learned at some point is that my attitude has a lot to do with how well I do in life and how well I do with my parents, my attitude to them. So what does it involve? It involves loving our parents. It involves holding them in high regard, showing them respect, showing them consideration. You know, even as adult children, you and I still are required to honor our parents for who they are and for the position they hold in our lives. Oh, we're now, perhaps we have our own families and our own husbands or wives, and we're raising our own children or perhaps grandchildren, and so we're not to be obedient in the sense that we were when we were growing up in our parents' home, but we are still to honor them. And I see so much of that today that does not seem to happen. Because grown adult children, I just want mom and dad out of the way. I want to go on with my life. I don't have time for them anymore. It's refreshing to see a man or a woman who says, those are my parents, and I will do my best to take care of them till the day I die. Because that means you truly love your parents. You truly are going to honor those parents. Because that's what God says we're to do. Honor your father and mother. But then he talks about us as parents. And this is something that we can help pass on to our children and our children's children, because if they're not already parents, one of the days they're going to be parents. And perhaps we can learn from some of our own mistakes, because one of the things he brings out is do not provoke your children to anger or to wrath. Have you ever done that? Have you ever done something that has caused your child to become angry with you, and then you look at, I shouldn't have handled it in that way? How do we sometimes provoke our children to anger? I'll give you some things. We do it through unreasonableness. What do I mean by that? I mean that what we do is we expect too much from our children. We require something of them that is beyond their capability. Maybe we place demands upon them that they cannot meet, and we know they can't meet it because they're children. They're not yet to the point where they have the maturity to do it. Maybe sometimes there are parents who just want to show, well, I'm the parent, you're the child, so you're going to do this. And so we put these petty rules in place just because we want to be in control. We're unreasonable. And we place so many demands upon them that they can't help but be frustrated. I can't do everything you want me to do. I'm trying. I can't do it all. And so they become angry with us because we're being unreasonable. Or sometimes we do nothing but find fault with our children. You ever seen anybody, a parent that does that? It doesn't matter how hard the child tries. In his or her parents' eyes, he or she can do nothing right. Can't you ever do anything right? You ever heard a parent say that to a child? It doesn't matter how hard they're trying. They just can't please mom or dad. Mom or dad, whoever it is always finding something wrong, and that parent is demeaning his or her child, not just in private, but sometimes out in public in front of others. How does that affect the child? Over time, it will provoke them to anger. Or we do it through neglect. We fail to be present for them physically, emotionally, spiritually. We're just not there. Do you realize that if you go back and you look at David and Absalom, that was the problem? David was an absentee father when it came to his son. And as a result of that, if you go back and you just begin reading again through 2 Samuel, start with chapter 14, then come all the way through chapter 18, what you find is that Absalom's conspiracy and his attempt to murder his own father was all the result of Dad didn't step in when he needed to step in and do what he needed to do. He was neglectful of doing his part in rearing his son. So sometimes it happens through neglect, but also we can provoke our children through anger or through something else, and that's inconsistency. What do I mean? That parent who is inconsistent. They make one rule for one day and they change it the next. They're never consistent. I don't know what the rules are. I don't know what you expect of me. You tell me this, but then you come back and you tell me this. Which one is it? I don't know. And so the child becomes angry because they cannot please the parent because they don't know what the parent expects of them. Or a parent who's inconsistent in the sense that they make promises to children but they don't keep those promises. I know of a situation, it's many years old now, in which a mom and dad were divorced. Mom had custody of the children. Dad would get weekend visitation. And Dad would constantly promise his son, I'm going to come pick you up Friday night. Son would pack his suitcase, sit out on the front porch, watch for Dad to come pick him up because Dad was going to take him back home and they were going to do fun things together. Dad wouldn't show up. Next weekend, I'm going to get you this time. I forgot. Something happened last week. I couldn't make it. Going to be there this time. Son would pack the suitcase, sit out on the front porch, watch for Dad, come pick him up. Dad didn't show up. And he was always defending of his dad. Oh, Dad had something come up. Dad had another job he had to take care of. Dad had this. Dad had that. When he became a man, he finally realized what was going on. It wasn't him. It was Dad. Wasn't anything he had done. It was Dad. Dad was inconsistent. Dad made promises he wasn't about to keep. You see, those things create an internal anger within our children. And if we want to raise Christian families, Christian homes, we've got to avoid those things. We've got to prevent ourselves or keep ourselves from doing things that purposely or bring our children to a point of anger when it could have been avoided. But the other thing he says is bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord, as the New American Standard translates it. How do we bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord? One is through gentleness. You think gentleness, yeah. That term, bring them up, as a matter of fact, bring up, it's a verb. It's a Greek verb that is translated bring up, but it literally means to nourish or to nurture. It's the same word, if you go back to chapter 5 here in Ephesians and look at verse 29, where Paul says that a man nourishes and cherishes his own body. Same word, nourishes. Bring up. He's saying that we nourish our children. Men, there are times we have to be tender with our children. What did you do, men, when your child was an infant? Did you ever hold them? Did you ever just sit there and hold them and look at them? I knew a father one time that said, I never did anything like that. That was my wife. She did all of that. But you know, to take that child and just hold that child and look at that child. How many of us as fathers have gotten down in the floor when they were toddlers and just let them climb all over us? Just let them play with us. Play wrestle in the floor. You know what you're really doing? You're establishing a relationship with that child. That child knows, Dad's going to get on to me when I need to, but Dad's the fun person. I can play with Dad at times and I love to be around Dad. Or what about this? What about hugging your son or your daughter when they graduate high school? When they finish college? When they get married? I know grown men whose dads have never hugged them. Never once. You see, it makes a difference how we nurture. I know we men are not like our wives. We don't nurture in the same way they do. but just having the time to talk with them and spend time with them and let them know you're important to me. Nurture them. Bring them up in the discipline, through discipline. You see, not only does Paul say that we nurture our children, he also says that we discipline them. And we men, I think that's kind of our area where we fall into. And that word 3 times, there are times when that word involves punishment. That's a part of it. As a matter of fact, if you go back to Luke chapter 23, verse 16, same word is used when Pilate says of Jesus, I will punish him and release him. Same word used in the original language. To discipline is at times to punish because of something that they have done that they knew they shouldn't have done, and within the right limits. But the book of Proverbs, and Solomon in his wisdom, I don't know how many children he had, but I'm sure he had a few with all of those wives and concubines. But he understood the need to do that. And if you look in Proverbs, you find Proverbs 19, verse 18, discipline your son while there is hope and do not desire his death. Or Proverbs 15, verse 32, he who neglects discipline despises himself, but he who listens to reproof accepts understanding. And then when you come over to the New Testament, you look at the book of Hebrews. And what you find there is that, and God, through the writer, is saying this, all discipline for the moment, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11, all discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful but sorrowful, yet to those who have been trained by it, afterward it yields, listen to this, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Break that down, the peaceful fruit of righteousness. That child will come to know true peace in their lives, and they will know what it means to be a righteous individual. Because that's the goal of the discipline, isn't it? Do we as parents want our children to grow up to be problem children in society? Do we want them to be individuals that others are afraid of and don't want to be around? No, we want them to be people that are godly individuals who have a heart for God and a desire to do what is right and good. It's been almost 40 years now, but back in 1986, a singer-songwriter by the name of Holly Dunn released a song, and I'm sure many of you have heard it, titled Daddy's Hands. You may remember the chorus to that song. The lyrics to the chorus are these: Daddy's hands were soft and kind when I was crying. Daddy's hands were hard as steel when I'd done wrong. Daddy's hands weren't always gentle, but I've come to understand there was always love in Daddy's hands. Our children will take our discipline far better if they know we do it out of love. I truly care about you, and I want what is best for you. The last thing that he brings out, he talks about bring them up, which is to nourish, to nurture, and he talks about discipline, but then he also brings out this other one, instruction. And the word there in the original language that's translated instruction means to put or to place something before someone's mind, to put it in front of them. It is a word that at times means to even rebuke or to restrain someone from doing something. Have you ever had to restrain your child from doing something that you did not want them to do because you knew it was going to be harmful or to them or dangerous to someone else? We find that word in the Old Testament, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, used in the example or in what God says to Samuel about Eli's sons. If you go back to 1 Samuel chapter 3, remember that God spoke to Samuel in the night. He kept thinking it was Eli calling for him, but he said, no, go back and say your servant is listening, because it was God that was speaking to him. Well, here's what God said. If you go back to 1 Samuel chapter 3 and you begin in verse 11, you find him saying, behold, I'm about to do a thing in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. In that day I will carry out against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons brought a curse on themselves, and he did not rebuke them. New American Standard Translation, most of the others say he did not restrain them. He did not instruct them. You shall not, you are not to do this. You will not do this. So Paul tells us that there needs to be that discipline and that instruction, but he says the discipline and an instruction of the Lord. You see, it's not just, it's a specific kind of discipline, a specific kind of instruction. And what he's saying to us is that the Lord himself stands behind this kind of discipline and instruction. What you are doing as a parent, when we administer this kind of discipline, this kind of instruction, is that we are God's instruments in our families to carry out His, that is God's discipline and God's instruction. And the Lord is working through us to accomplish His will in the lives of our children. Because aren't our children just given to us on loan anyway? Aren't they really His children? And we're just simply raising them so that they can come to know Him and serve Him faithfully in their lives. As I close this out tonight, I want to say, when you think about childhood, it is a time of life in which lives are made and lives are broken. Think about that. Childhood is a time when lives are made or broken. We've seen many a child that we think, boy, if we could go back, rewind to this point in time, and change what happens right here, the outcome for that child might be totally different. It'd be better. The child would have turned out differently. I'm not God, I can't say. But I think sometimes we've looked at different ones, different children, and wondered, what if this had happened this way and not that way? And we've seen children that have turned out great, and we've seen other children that have turned out broken. And for those who are children going through the period of childhood, and I'm sure every one of us was in that phase of our lives, can't wait till it's over. Can't wait till I'm old enough to drive. Can't wait till I'm old enough to do this. Can't wait till I'm out of high school. Can't wait till I have my first job, or whatever it may have been. Can't wait till I'm married. But you know where you're at now? If you stop and look back upon your childhood, you think, boy, those years flew by. That was just such a short period of time. I heard we had a family reunion yesterday for the Kill side of the family, and one of my cousins, he's the youngest of my cousins, and he was telling his son, who is now a grown young man driving his own car, and he said to him, don't rush your childhood. Stay a child as long as you can. And I'm thinking, it doesn't work that way. You've got to grow up. You've got to go out in the world. You've got to make life. You've got to take on responsibility. You can't stay a child forever. And I knew what he was saying. I wish I could have some of those years back. But we look back and we say, where did all the time go? And we wonder about that. But you know, as parents and as grandparents, our children need to learn to live out God's direction in their lives so that they can embrace life to its fullest. There's so much more to life when it is lived according to God's will. And one day, that baby boy is going to be leading his own family. And one day, that baby girl is going to be giving birth, men, to your grandchild. And you're going to think, where did all the time go? You only have a short period of time in which to try to instill within them the love, the desire to honor God, the faithfulness that you long for, that you want to see, and that we as a church hope to help create within the families that we bring in. So what I'm asking you is, please pray that God will guide you, but pray that God will guide your children, because most of you in this room have children and grandchildren that are now raising their own children, that God will guide them and help them to do that, because the eternal well-being of our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will be affected by that. And we want what? Christian homes. God, give us Christian homes. places where men are the men God wants us to be, places where women are the nurturing individuals that God calls you to be, places where children are growing up to love and serve the God that we love and adore. That's what we want. That's what we're striving for. Maybe tonight you look at your own life and you say, you know, I messed up some things over the years. I can't take them back, but I sure would like to be forgiven of it. Or maybe you're a person here tonight that's not a Christian yet. And God is offering to you to take away the sin in your life that separates you from Him and keeps you out of an eternal abode with Him. You need to be willing to confess Christ as Lord and Savior. Turn away from those sins, be buried with Him in baptism. If we need to pray with you, pray for you. If we need to baptize you tonight, we invite you to come as together we stand and sing.